Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is a watermelon lime zinger, which is really nice. But I have it iced today because it's just so hot. It's just so hot. It's just so hot. It's starting to cool down, but ugh. So I'm doing the June 2021 wrap up, trying to do it as soon as possible because my mind is going to get taken over by the whole Jane Austen July thing. I know how I operate. So let's do this. Actually, I finished the last half, so I'm really just covering the last half of June. Um, More books than I thought I was going to. Not a whole bunch, but just enough because I thought my friend was in town for a few days. I was going to spend a long weekend, mostly walking, running around the city with her, and I did a little bit of that. But one of the last day that we were going to spend together, we didn't because it was too hot. We had spent the day before, and it was just too much. We both needed to rest. A little bit rough to have taken a day off, but actually, I'm kind of glad I did because it gave me the opportunity to do a lot of reading. And I also got to enjoy spending time with my friend, and I also got to get out of the city for a day, which I haven't done since 2019. So that's very good. So yeah. But yeah, so I ended up reading a lot, but I'm not gonna go into, I don't think, into depth about every single one of these books because, like I said, mind is starting to fade. Another thing that happened was two of the books, yes, two of the books, I don't have with me anymore because all of the books that I finished, let me see, yep, were library books because as we got to the end of June, I realized that a lot of books are not renewable and they're going to start the fines if I don't bring them back. So I had to finish a lot of things and bring them back. And I finished more things, I'll bring them back soon. It's just, yeah, I was so spoiled. I'm not saying the pandemic was a wonderful, wonderful time. I don't even know if it's technically over. But there were some things in which we got spoiled in some of us that we just got used to a certain way of doing things. So instead of finishing a lot of the books on my currently reading that I own, I didn't. I finished maybe one out of all of them. And then maybe some library books that were there. But I did manage to remove some. It's a little less than it was, but I'm sure reading Jane Austen will just add to the list. But that's okay. My library books, my checked out books, are a lot less than they were. And they will be a lot less sooner rather than later. So that's good. So let me just talk about some of the books I read. One of the books I finished, I don't have with me, is The Last Bookshop in London by Madeline Martin. Martin. Pretty sure I wrote that correctly. I got that out because it said London and bookshop in it. And that's me. But it is a World War II historical novel, which I'm not that big on. I'm not against it, but it's not something I gravitate toward usually. But this was pretty good. It was about a woman, whatever, who, with her friend, moved from a little town in England to London in 1939 with a family friend who keeps them and helps them find jobs and everything because they just wanted a different life, whatever. But of course, they move into London right when the war is going to start getting really started. And she finds herself also having to do all kinds of sheltering and involvement with the Blitz, seeing all kinds of stuff. But I actually forgot her name. I think it's Grace. Isn't that terrible when you leave a book and you spend time with other books, you start to forget little details that are kind of big. But anyway, but I remember the plot anyway, so that's the main thing, right? So she has a job in a bookshop, and the bookshop owner is a little bit grumpy, doesn't really want any help, but of course, things change in the course of the book. But she doesn't have real experience. She has experience working at shops, but not in bookshops. She doesn't have much experience with books. She hasn't been much of a reader up until now. But between wanting to prove herself at this job, and also she meets someone, of course, who is very helpful to her in getting to know books, and he's apparently quite attractive too. She really does start to take an interest in reading and starts to read some amazing books, and that also helps to get her through the Blitz. Even, scenes of reading books to people while they're sheltering in underground stations. It's I don't know if that ever happened, but it's kind of a nice idea and takes away from some of the real actual sadness of that time. There was a lot of sad things that happened in the book, but one of the things I liked, which I don't know if it's incredibly realistic, but it's a kind of nice idea, is that almost every character she meets that is a negative character, a mean person, a grumpy person, a kind of almost creepy person, or whatever person that she comes across, it seems that she ends up thinking better of them, and they end up, in a decent spot with each other. And I don't know if that's because, dealing with the war and everything could have brought them together. That might have helped. Honestly, it probably does help in some cases. When you're going through rough times together, you forget the petty things, right? But it really depends on the person. But I did kind of like that feeling. And yeah. So I thought it was a really fun book, and I enjoyed it. Fun is kind of a weird thing to say when you're dealing with all kinds of war and death and stuff, but I liked it. So it's a book lover book, and it's a, history lover's book, I think. So the other book that I read that was, I don't know why I call it similar. It's really not. It's just, it's a historical novel. This one has some time taking place in World War One, but more toward the ending of the book. The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams, and I'd heard nothing but good things about this on BookTube and elsewhere. And anyway, and it was like effusive love, for this book. So I said, well, I hope I'm not disappointed. And I wasn't. The Dictionary of Lost Words by Pip Williams is about also like a historical novel in that it takes place around things that actually happened. So a number of years ago, I read a book called The Professor and the Madman, and I don't think it's the only book I read about the making of the Oxford English Dictionary. I think there was another book I read before that, but the name is not occurring to me right now. It was a while back. So was The Professor and the Madman. I read that in 2014, but I saw the movie based on it not too long ago. It was okay. It was pretty good. But they compiled the book, not too surprisingly, I think, in Oxford, and the main players that were part of the making of this dictionary were there in the book, in the story, but they added fictional characters, and one was our main character, who I think his name was Esme. It was first person, so that's not a name I come across very often. And she helps out, or she kind of hangs out with her dad, who was a widower, working in the scriptorium, which is where it's like a kind of shack that was built to put, all the little mailings that people sent in with words and where they found this word, different sources. So she kind of grows up there, hanging out with her dad, gets very wrapped up in books. Well, mostly words more than books, but it's a book that they're putting together. And in the midst of this, as she grows up and finally has a place of her own there and meets all kinds of different people, some which affect her very much, some of which, teach her things in life, she starts to learn that there are words that are not included in the dictionary. Well, some of them are just like, swear words, curse words, whatever you want to call it. And some are just words that are used by people that are not considered useful, like servants, stuff like that. People who work in the markets, prostitutes, I guess. Anybody, and also women. Sometimes just words that are more women's words that weren't considered enough to use in the dictionary. So when she discovers this, she starts to put together her own Dictionary of Lost Words, her own collection. Sometimes she actually just steals slips that other people dropped that weren't necessarily, going to be removed from the dictionary. But so she's got a little bit of a habit there, but it's just a lot of love for words. I just loved it. And so she goes through all kinds of ups and downs in her life, and finally, of course, culminating in World War One, loses a lot of people in death, which is kind of hard to read again. A lot of close people. But I thought it was quite a page turner. At least I did. But I think you really have to love words, and you really have to be interested in the whole compiling of a dictionary, which I am. So I would say if this sounds good to you, you'll probably very much enjoy it. So the next book I still have, I think it's the only nonfiction of this group, even though it's kind of dramatized as well. So it's part part graphic novel almost, you know? So this is called Why She Wrote. This is one of, I don't know what was the pink in the books I was reading, but I'd heard about this on BookTube and on Instagram. Um, there's I think an Instagram that I follow called Bonnets at Dawn. And so it was just, mainly it was about Jane Austen versus the Brontes. And then they started, these ladies started putting together, you know, stories and information about women writers. So it's called Why She Wrote, but I would say my only objection is that there's not always a specific definition or answer to why she wrote. Sometimes it's just an instance in the life of certain people. So it tells a little bit about a person in different categories and their life, brief page of their life, and then it goes into like kind of just graphic novel telling almost of their story. And then once that's gone, it goes into selected work, stuff like that. So a little bit of a summing up of their lives and everything. Sorry, I heard my cat knock something down inside, and I just don't want to check on it right now. My kitchen, I'm going to get into this in a minute, but my kitchen is in such a state right now that everything just gets in the way. Okay, but this was a fun story, and it made me really, I've read a lot of works by a lot of these writers, but I either want to reread them. Jane Austen's in there, so obviously I was going to get into that. But I actually want to read not just the works of some of these writers, which I do, because a lot of these people I've only read a little bit of, but I would like to read more of their biographies, just get more in-depth information, I think. Not everybody, but many, many people. I've already read a lot of these people's biographies, actually. So it's kind of fun. It's also a good, almost like a good introduction into some of these writers if you're not very familiar with them. So I thought that was good. It covers all of the Bronte sisters, and Beatrix Potter's in here, Frances Hodgson Burnett, Frances Burney, who I did not know went through quite a painful surgery, and where is she? Oh, wait, Louisa May Alcott's in here. I knew enough about her, really. Trying to find other people that I didn't know much about before, and of course they're not popping up now because, you know. Okay, here's one I hadn't read much about, Alice Dunbar Nelson. So at least one or two or three people that I had very little knowledge about, so sparked my curiosity. Kind of a fun book. I didn't fall in love with it, but it was very nice to read. You know, I finished Josephine Tey's. This is the only mystery I read this month, so I'm not going to put the hat on. It's too hot. Miss Pym Disposes, and this is now my, I think, third Josephine Tey book, and I have more that I want to read of hers. This is not a straightforward mystery novel. There is a mystery that comes up, but it takes a real while before it really happens. It takes like chapters and chapters really getting to know the characters and interacting with them before anything really happens. So Miss Pym was a French teacher, but she ended up coming to some money and then reading up and writing about psychology. So she becomes a little bit, successful, I guess you would say, in what she was doing. And she gets invited back by an old friend who's kind of running this school. That is a physical training school for females, I guess. And so she gives a talk, but then she ends up being talked into staying for a little while until like the end, which is kind of like a graduation situation. So she gets to know all these girls and their personalities and who is the harder working ones and what kind of relationships they have, all kinds of things. She gets involved. And then something happens toward the ending that doesn't really make sense, and then someone gets into an accident which ends up becoming fatal. So that's in the description, but it takes a really long time before it happens. And then Lucy Pym, her name's Lucy, Miss Pym decides she finds out a few things without even investigating, really, but she kind of uses her observation of people to figure things out. And then there's kind of a bit of a surprise to some people, but I kind of figured it out. So I can't really tell you much about it, except it was good. I liked it. Just too many characters. In a lot of ways, but in a lot of ways it doesn't, but in some ways it reminds me a bit of Gaudy Night by Dorothy L. Sayers, in which someone goes to a school when they're older and gets to know all these people, staff and students, and comes across a mystery. It is a different story, but in some ways that is similar. Just so many people to get to know. I thought it was an interesting book, but it just kind of, the pacing was a little weird. But it was still a very well written book, and I can't. It's really hard for me to explain how I feel about Josephine Tey. She's just like a different kind of writer to any mystery writer I've ever come across. Just maybe I haven't read all of her books, so I can't really get to that yet. But it doesn't usually feel like you're reading a mystery novel. So if you kind of like that, then that's a good idea. I do like reading from this time period. I think it was written in the 40s or late 40s, I think. It's kind of fun. Sometimes, of course, antiquated expressions that we don't use anymore. And then last but not least, I read, although it was one of my quickest reads, a book from the title, you'll see why I picked it, a YA book called A Cuban Girl's Guide to Tea and Tomorrow by Laura Taylor Namey. Yes. So this is about a girl who just recently graduated high school, and she's got her whole life kind of planned for herself. Her name is Lila, and she lives in Miami, and she's Cuban, of Cuban background, and she's been cooking in her grandmother's bakery, panaderia. I don't want to butcher Spanish today. Some days I could do it, and some days I can't. I don't think today's one of those days. And so yeah, she thinks she's got her life figured out, but then, like, all at once, a bunch of little things happen to her, some of which are tragedies, some of which are just sad things, and she just can't handle it. So she does something a little bit out of character, and her family gets a little worried about her and sends her to England because, well, they have kind of family living in Winchester, England. So it wasn't really much London, which is fine because you can't read everything that takes place in London. And kind of nice to take, things out of London sometimes in modern times. But she starts out being really upset having to be, displaced at this time. And at first she's got a really bad attitude toward everything. But then she discovers, because where she's staying is kind of like I don't know what you call it. Is it an inn or whatever? But it has a restaurant, and the cook there, she kind of offers to help out there. And so she works with the cook, and then the cook has to take a little leave of absence for reasons, and so she kind of takes over the kitchen for the summer. And in doing so, she also meets other people in town. Of course, meets a guy who happens to work at his family's tea shop. I mean, like, because that happens. But, and so she gradually starts to get to know a little bit of a different life. And so then she obviously has some decisions to make, and thoughts that there are other things in life that, maybe will she want to go about her life as she had planned it all this time, or will she want something different? The guy she met, thankfully wasn't just a complete, just so perfect kind of person, but he was pretty good of a guy, but he had his own family issues to deal with, and that was kind of interesting. And Leela, I think, becomes more likable, and you become really hungry reading this book, which is I was talking about the kitchen, because she keeps talking about all the food she cooks and bakes, all the Cuban food. And I've had Cuban food. There are a number of Cuban restaurants near me. I've had friends who are Cuban who have cooked for me, and not just for me, but and it's pretty amazing. So reading about it makes me hungry. It was kind of a weird thought, though. I mean, I'm totally into fusion. I'm totally into trying things everywhere I go. But can you imagine going into a restaurant that is like attached to an inn in a very British part of town, and then eating Cuban food? It might have been a weird thing for some, I guess, but it doesn't seem to faze them. Hey, you know what? Variety. But, so I actually ended up Googling to see if there's a lot of Cuban restaurants in England. I did see a few in London, but I'm curious about that because I never thought to look it up. But, yeah, I like the idea. The only thing it's like a like and dislike thing, where, like, Leela, in the beginning, obviously, like I said, she's a little bit, I don't want to say bratty, she's been through some things, but she's a little bit stubborn and a little bit just not willing to play around, you know what I mean? She's to play, what's the word? Play along, that's the word. And so she's a little, so yeah, like I said, her attitude, I like that she's confident, she's really good at cooking So she knows. She knows what she knows, and that's good. But sometimes it was a little bit like, I know better, and that could be annoying sometimes, especially, well, no, I'm not going to be like that. But it's just, yeah, so I don't know how I would have personally reacted to her had I met her, but I also kind of liked her story and how it turned out. So it was a fun, enjoyable read. Again, it made me hungry, but it also made me frustrated, like I said, because my kitchen is an absolute disaster right now, and cooking is just not fun. It's like very basic and a means to an end now, but it's not. There's no creativity allowed, and I think what my cat just knocked over was something I actually need for cooking. So I really hope it's not broken. Sorry about that. I know this wasn't the most cheerful of my wrap ups, but it wasn't. It was a good reading month, and I think I survived this first heat wave, a second heat wave actually of this summer, and so yeah, it was a pretty good times. It was nice to get not only a lot of reading done, but it was nice to see a little more of other places than I've seen recently. Not just that, it wasn't just that I got out of town, but I also went further downtown. I think I mentioned recently I haven't been that much downtown recently, but I was almost all the way, with my friend, and we ended up at one point at the South Street Seaport, which was one of my favorite places as a kid to go to on my school trips and everything, and it is completely different now. It was actually disappointing, although their air conditioning was good when we stopped in, and we needed that, but it was so disappointing because there was this, it was a place I used to go to when I worked downtown. I used to work not far from South Street Seaport, and it's just a little seaport. It had like old boats there you could tour, and it used to have a fish market. It hasn't had that in a while, but it's right near the river. You could stare out the water, and it had a little shopping area in a place called Pier 17 that was kind of cheesy, a little bit like a mall, just. But I actually did some shopping, and I kind of liked it, and it had a food court situation, and that's all gone now. It's all really, really posh and, well, overpriced and very not full of people, which, I mean, nothing is as full of people as it was, but it just, yeah, it wasn't what it was disappointing. But there's a bookshop that opened up. It's another McNally Jackson bookshop in, there's a couple of them in the city, and now there's that one. So that was good. It was nice to pop into there and have a look. I got a tote. Oh, and I also got some teas. I should have done a little tea haul for you guys when I was at Beacon. Maybe another time. Because they're really cool teas. We'll see if I have time. I'm kind of going, like I said, into Jane Austen mode. So anyway, let me know what you think of all these books, and if you've read any of them, and if you want to read any of them, if you want to know any more about them. Yeah. So until then, hope you guys have had a good June, and I hope you have a great July. This is Catherine with her iced tea, taking tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day. Bye.